something that still really keeps me up at night is the 2015 draft. So I built our model for that while I was still at Stanford, but I was working really closely with Ben Falk, who at that time was our VP of strategy. And, we were just going back and forth basically every day and just working hard to get as much data as we possibly could to power our model.
Welcome to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host. And on this episode, I'm thrilled to have John Sears on the podcast. He is a special advisor to the Los Angeles Dodgers and is an all-around sports analytics expert. Among other topics in this episode, he tells us about his work in the NBA, and in particular, some of the work he did when he was working with the Philadelphia 76ers and Sam Hinkie. He also tells us about his work in baseball as he works for the Dodgers. He describes some of the data sets that they have to work with, which sound pretty incredible, and he describes some of the open positions that the Dodgers have. He ends with some advice about how to break into the sports world. The Football Analytics Show is brought to you by the Power Ranks Sports Betting newsletter. This is a free service that strives to be three things. 1, valuable. 2, concise. 3, entertaining. Every Saturday, I send out my curated list of sports betting tips and analytics. If you need some action on a weekend, that's what this newsletter is for. You'll also get a taste for some of my football analytics as we head into football season. To sign up for this free service, go to thepowerrank.com. That is my site for better sports betting through data and analytics. Once again, that's thepowerrank.com. Joining me on this episode of the Football Analytics Show is John Sears. He has a master's in operations research from Stanford University, and then he went on to work in the NBA for both the Philadelphia 76ers and the Minnesota Timberwolves. He is currently a special advisor to the Los Angeles Dodgers. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ed. Really excited to be here today.
Absolutely. I'm excited to have you on. John, would like to know a little bit more about your story. Maybe give us a brief description of your academic background and then your time at Stanford where you started a sports analytics club.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think this is one of those funny things when you reflect on your background after having done it, it all kind of makes sense. I think there's like a Steve Jobs quote about that. You can only sort of see the connections in reverse. But at
Sure.
the time it felt super random. So I went to a liberal arts college for undergrad because I had no conviction in what I wanted to do coming out of high school. I just didn't think I was ready to even pick a major to apply to. And so wanted to get out of that, like a really wide breadth of knowledge. So I did a dual degree in computer science and pre-med, which is a funny pairing. But by the end of it, was very confident I did not want to do medicine. And so I graduated in 2009 in the midst of the financial crisis, and I took a job as a software engineer at HBO, mostly because it was in New York City, and I really wanted to live in New York.
Cool.
I learned a lot on the job, but honestly, I just wasn't developing very quickly there. I spent about a year and a half at HBO and was building a lot of internal software. And I guess I got very, very lucky in that out of the blue, one of my professors from undergrad, who I'd taken this sort of random high-level econ elective with, reached out and said, "Hey, I've this position at the Federal Reserve opened up in a research assistant role. I know you were really kind of digging this type of quant modeling for econ stuff when you were an undergrad. If you're interested, I'd love to recommend you." And so that single thing just completely changed the trajectory of my career because I wasn't really looking, but I was kind of just sort of stuck in the mud. And this professor,
Right.
Danny Bourne, set me up with this application. And I got really into it. I applied. I studied really hard for the interviews and I got it. And so then I moved down to Washington, D.C. and worked at the Fed for a while, my group was really just doing quant modeling of financial derivatives like options,
Right.
futures contracts, swaptions, all this kind of stuff. And it was in the midst of the crisis, so like there's just a fertile opportunity to learn on the job, and that's where I got introduced into statistics and some of that type of modeling work. And so by the end of it, I kind of I was thinking really hard about what I wanted to do next. And while I loved the day to day of that type of stuff, I wasn't in love with the domain. I wasn't sort of intrinsically motivated by the concept of trying to ascertain market expectations from financial derivatives pricing. And so I didn't really want to go work on Wall Street, which is sort of the natural thing, or go get a PhD and go back to the Fed. And so I really thought, I was like, what do I want to do with my life? And I zoomed out really hard and I said, like, if I could do anything right now, I'm not saying with any sort of implication on how realistic it is, but if I could do anything, I would love to be working in sports doing this kind of quant modeling for a team. And my calculus then was, well, it seems like baseball is kind of solved. Football feels too hard. And so basketball is probably like the right level of opportunity. And so I started just applying around. There weren't jobs, but like, there was the Houston Rockets I'd heard were doing stuff. And so
Right.
on LinkedIn, and they actually then did post a role. And so I applied cold, just blind resume drop, and was fortunate that they pulled my name out. And I got into the interview process there, started talking to them, and I just realized that like this is a thing that I can do. And so if I can do it, if the opportunity exists, then like I should go for it as hard as I can. And so I sort of got more serious. I applied to Stanford and I got in to do this program of operations research, which is really, for folks who haven't heard of it, it's the study of decision making under uncertainty is the best way I would describe it. Mm-hmm. Which, in my opinion, back then mapped really well to the sports job. And so, I spent 2 years there, studied OR. Really, like the best part about that was that I knew exactly what I wanted to do coming out of it, which was get a job in the NBA doing modeling. And so for every class, I was really just trying to be opportunistic about what can I pull out of this that I can use later. And so, that's kind of my, and then, I was fortunate while I was there to get connected to Sam Hinkie, who I'd met through the interview process with the Rockets, who then took a lead job in Philly. And so started just working part-time while I was there and went full-time after I graduated.
That's awesome. So I have so many things I want to try to unpack there. When you were an undergrad, it sounds like you got your start with this predictive modeling with some high-level econ classes. Is that right?
Yeah, honestly, it wasn't even predictive modeling. It was like just trying to apply these mathy concepts to econ. And so like, if we can model consumer preferences with sort of this type of functional form, how do we then like optimize the sort of market clearing price based on these types of assumptions? And so the thing that really got me going was this class in price theory, where all of a sudden I could actually apply some of these like mathematical and computer science concepts that I'd learned along the way to sort of modeling stuff. And it was less predictive, more just trying to understand the state of the market.
So, I mean, I would just off the cuff think that it was like an econometrics class where you're trying to do some regressions, but what was kind of like the underlying math that you were trying to use to understand things in economics?
Yeah, it was things like Lagrangians to try to find sort of the based on a set, like I guess for folks who are maybe less mathy, it's basically a way to find a optimal point, in this case, like an optimal price given a set of constraints.
Oh, and, right. Okay.
Yeah, kind of multivariate calculus type of stuff. And like, frankly, and this is a little sad, but like I'd taken multivariate calculus freshman year, and then in none of the classes I took for 4 years did I ever even use it. And so then all of a sudden, here's this econ class, and it's super mathy and really fun to try to actually think about, well, why did we learn all those concepts? And it was to try to model behavior using these sort of functional forms. And I thought that was really, really interesting. And so I would just go to this professor Jenny's office hours every week and just pick her brain on like, hey, like, why do we do this? What applications does this have in the real world? And got pretty into it.
No, that's awesome. So, I mean, it sounds like you were doing optimization, right? And applying that to, yeah.
Which is a
So,
core piece of OR too, just to like sort of pull forward the where I would go later. Yeah.
no, for sure. I do think it's very interesting that you learn differential equations. I mean, I learned it as a freshman, and then you do multivariate calculus. And at some point that year, I was like, what am I doing? Like, why do I care about this stuff? And, they put up some like toy examples
Yep.
and I think, I mean, at that point, I think I was probably similar to you. I didn't quite know what I wanted to do with my life. I think I had decided I wanted to do chemical engineering because it was hard, great decisions that 18, 19-year-olds make. But it was only really like a linear algebra class. I forget if it was my freshman or sophomore year, but it was only then where the stuff I was learning there, like, helped me cut down the amount of time, like solving linear equations. Like, instead of doing it by hand in my chemical engineering classes, I got to like just plug it into MATLAB, and it took me 10 seconds instead of like an hour. I'm like, I get it. So I feel like that was kind of my realization. Like, yeah, you need to learn some math because the stuff is useful. And it sounds like you kind of had like a similar, maybe over a little bit longer time span when you were in college.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The other funny one along those lines was on the computer science side. Like, I learned to code early, like when I was pretty young, and did CS in college. Really enjoyed it. But then when I was at the Fed and I was trying to do these like learn sort of these term structure models, these like time series, latent factor time series models, it didn't really feel like there was much application. But something that one of my section chief there told me, she said, like, the thing about it though, John, is that like once you actually start doing research, you're going to be able to code these things up in like a tenth of the time that the folks who are econ majors could. And so you'll be able to iterate so much faster. And like, that's like, actually, that's right. Like, you can really take pride in like the sort of the software that you write for doing research, because it actually does matter, like, how efficient it runs and how correct it is quickly, things that unit testing actually are good to do. So yeah, I think it's really cool when you find these applications of different fields that you studied to be helpful in applying something in a completely different department or domain.
Absolutely. John, I want to get back into your time at the Fed. So it sounds like it was 2009 and the stuff had hit the fan. And so like what were you doing there? And just what was it like? I mean, I'm sure it was pretty stressful, like,
Yeah. So I got there early in 2011. I graduated in 2009, which is like when everything was popping off. But then, worked at HBO for a year and a half and joined the Fed in early 2011. And so it was still just absolute chaos. The Fed really stepped in pretty hard in terms of intervention in order to try to help to stabilize the economy. I mean, it was super stressful. I remember like my third or fourth week on the job, just pulling an all-nighter there in preparation for one of the board of governors meetings. And like really but it was very stressful and we worked very hard. However, it was also extremely energizing. Like, it blew me away, the quality of the people who were there. The Fed is a governmental body, but it sort of operates a little bit more independently. It's not congressionally apportioned. I'd say like politics is effectively, at least in my experience there from the bottom level, was like zero. It was a bunch of really, really smart people who had dedicated their lives to trying to do national like public service. And so, we were working really hard. It was super innovative though. Like, a lot of the sort of the theory was being built up on the fly as we went. These things like, effects of large scale asset purchases, what became called like QE, quantitative easing, was being developed by my group at the Fed. And so, we were doing a ton of I was a research assistant, so I was doing a ton of things like data pools for the research folks, doing a lot of data analysis for more like tactical stuff. Like, so we have board of governors meetings every 6-ish weeks or so. And so we would do just trying to pull a bunch of economic and financial indicators for that and try to interpret that in terms of like, what does it say about market expectations and the state of the economy? Yeah, I mean, it was just a really exciting time to be there. And the other interesting corollary to it being the middle of the financial crisis was that a bunch of really, really amazing undergrads who had, come out of school in the last few years hadn't been able to get those, hedge fund jobs, quant roles in industry or like, investment banking roles because nobody was hiring. And so they went to the Fed. So like the people around me who were sort of my peers were super inspirational, like really, really top notch people. And so, yeah, that was kind of a really cool environment to be in for a while.
It sounds like you were like trying to construct the theory to understand the crisis as you went along almost.
Yeah, crisis and intervention. I mean, that was the interesting thing. Like, so at a really high level, what the Fed did was, okay, first we decreased interest rates to basically zero. And the idea there is that if you can borrow money at low rates, you'll be able to, invest that in your business, and that will start to spur more job growth, and the economy will start to turn. However, what they saw is that like, okay, the longer term lending rates were still pretty high. If you needed to borrow money for like outside of like short term lending, you still were paying pretty high. So what they did, and this had never really been done before, was they started actually just buying long term bonds, the government bond in the open market. And what buying bonds does is it increases the price, which decreases the yield on the bond. And so if the market price, quote unquote, for yield is going down to like, even less than like 3 or 4% for a 30-year bond, that means that it becomes easier for banks more attractive for banks to lend at lower rates for longer term. And so that basically the idea there is that, you can sort of create the second level of intervention beyond the more typical arm they have to pull, which is the overnight rate, the Fed funds rate.
So that's fascinating.
So we were studying then like the implications of those asset purchases, like what will it do if we do it, and also the execution of it. It's actually, it's easy to say in theory, well, we're going to buy $2 billion worth of bonds, but like how do you do that in a way that's minimally disruptive to the market? Yeah.
Right. And it sounded like your work was kind of practical, understanding the data sets, getting answers, preparing for these meetings.
Mostly I was a research assistant. So I was the grunt kind of doing data pools, doing like the very basic stuff mostly at the instruction of the economists.
Sure.
But what I got out of it was like, would just get invaluable time sitting down with those economists talking about like, hey, why are we doing this? What's the theory behind the hypothesis that we're investigating? And that's basically it.
Right. And there was a theory, I presume, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, at least during that time at the Fed, that it was like a very practical institution, right? Like you have to make sure the economy doesn't get any worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it was also haywire, like we dealt with some similar to what we're dealing with right now, but like debt ceiling crises. The debt got downgraded while I was there by S&P, and that was a whole crisis for a moment. Yeah.
How timely to bring that up.
Yes.
As we're sitting here, as we are sitting here in late May. All right. So you move, like you're at the Federal Reserve. When did you start working with Daryl Morey and the Rockets like part-time before?
No, I actually turned down the job. I backed out of the interview process at the very last moment and, decided I needed to, there were some things that were keeping me in DC for the short term, but then longer term decided to go to grad school because like, if I wanted to do it, I wanted to do it at a really high level. And while I learned a lot at the Fed, it hadn't given me the full extent of practical training in predictive modeling that I really wanted to get. And so started looking at grad programs and funding opportunities at different schools. And that's kind of how I landed on Stanford.
Awesome. So Right. Okay. So you end up going to Stanford. And I think what people don't understand when you say operations research, that kind of sounds businessy or whatnot. But
Yes.
if I remember right from my time at Stanford, it's very math intensive, ton of
Yeah,
optimization.
exactly.
I forget what else you guys do, but like, right. Like you're taking a ton
Yep.
of optimization and
Stochastic modeling, a lot of
st-
Markov chain modeling, dynamic
right.
programming. Yeah.
Yeah. So was that, I mean, did you get out of that what you wanted, and was that worthwhile as you made the transition into sports?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I'll say a few things. So number one, I absolutely got out of it what I wanted. Like I said earlier, like I came in knowing what I wanted, which was really really helpful. Which was to make this kind of career pivot into building models and trying to understand player performance, understand tactics using data. And so the nice thing about my program was it was a 2-year master's, and I could do approximately half of it was kind of core stuff in the operations research field. So yeah, like
Right.
optimization, Markov modeling, stochastic modeling in general, like dynamic programming. But then the nice thing was like there was enough flexibility to take a bunch of electives. So I went bonkers just taking machine learning and stats classes. With the focus on really trying to understand the uncertainty in these estimates, because like I knew sports is generally really small data. And
Yep.
so while most of tech is focused on, how do you deal with billions and billions of log data points every day coming in from like your search engine or whatever your high traffic site is, sports is like, oh, you got, let's say 16 football games to learn off of, or 82 basketball games, 162 baseball games. And you really have to try to understand like the level of confidence you should have in any single parameter estimate in those models. So I took a bunch of ML, and that's machine learning and stats classes as well. So yeah, it's funny because was it worth it? In my case, yes. I also was able to find this funding opportunity through teaching economics. So like
Okay.
through my Fed background, I was able to get this fully funded teaching associate role, teaching assistant, I think
Nice.
it's called, through the econ department. Yeah, that made it all feasible, I think, to like
Sure.
do it your
Yeah.
master's. It was, tuition paid, and I got a stipend. So I basically could do it for approximately like
Wow.
no net. Um,
I mean, you're
yeah,
essentially a PhD student.
I was basically exactly paid like a PhD student, exactly. And it was hard work. It was like about 25 hours a week of teaching, 2 out of the 3 terms. But if you think about it as $60,000 tuition plus $30,000 stipend, it's like, yeah, pretty good.
Yeah.
So yeah, when I tell
Sure.
people, I talk to a lot of young people now who are looking at grad school, the calculus, in my opinion, for grad school really is like, if you're trying to make a career pivot and you really need to learn something from the ground up, and you can afford it or you can get funding to make it work, like it's a pretty good opportunity. But if you're still in undergrad, like you shouldn't be thinking about doing a master's. Like you should just take the classes that you want to get now. I think there's nothing special about grad school. It's really just it's more time to be in school. And so like if you need more time, do it. But otherwise, I would try to avoid it because it's very expensive. And I think the other part is like try really hard to understand exactly what you want to do ahead of time, because the other thing about it was a fair number of my classmates ended up graduating somewhat unsatisfied because like they didn't know what they were trying to do, and so they took a smattering of classes from across the curriculum, and that doesn't really help you in the end. You don't gain deep expertise off of like
Right.
2 or 3 classes.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. I think that's pretty good advice. I mean, like my journey was a lot different, right? Because I went to grad school thinking I would be a professor, and that didn't work out. And so luckily I had enough quantitative skills to make it work in the sports world. But I think you do need to know, yeah, exactly what you want to do. And it sounds like you really benefited from learning things from the ground up. But I did want to ask you this. You took a bunch of machine learning classes. It was a different era, right? It wasn't the AI chat GPT era that we are in 2023, right? I think it's what, like 2012, 2013 that you were at Stanford.
2013
So,
to 2015.
and so we have so many more tools. It's been a decade. All these tools are more robust. Does your advice change in the sense like, does a young person less need to understand those basics to develop new tools because there are so many tools out there, or should you still get that in-depth background?
Yeah, in at least where we are right now, and I'm in no means an expert on AI, but I've tried to stay pretty abreast on everything. And I've had the opportunity to work for about a year as a research scientist doing deep learning research. Um, it's I still think it's so fundamental to understand the the basics of statistical inference and machine learning, because like it's true that now we have these huge billion parameter models that can do things we never anticipated them doing. However, it doesn't give us more data points for plate appearances or curveballs. The problems that arise in sports are still small data, and so it is the sort of deep learning revolution for vision and NLP has not been a panacea for trying to understand all of the pieces in sports. Now, I want to be clear: there are aspects of our world that absolutely those models are really well fit for, and we're hiring for people to come in and do that kind of stuff as well. We have these crazy data sets of like player skeletal limb tracking, and so 300 hertz, 300 ticks per second of like 25 points on a player's body. And so the things that you can do with that are those are clear sort of big machine learning problems to learn from with deep neural networks. But there's so much of it that doesn't really fit into that I think it's useful. And the truth is, in the end, even if the models get better and somehow, I don't really understand how that would happen, but you're able to bring in some sort of inductive bias or something that allows you to apply more and more black box models directly to small data, I think it's still going to be pretty helpful to understand what's going on under the hood. Because there's like, I'm gonna butcher the quote, but there's a Richard Feynman quote that I really like that I think applies very well to sports stuff, which is like, the trick is not to fool yourself, and you're the easiest person to fool. So that's not exactly it, but basically, like,
Right.
the signal to noise ratio is really poor in this domain, and you're always trying to find the actual signal, and you put so much emotional energy into finding it because you're like, this is going to be the thing that helps you win. And it's just so easy to fool yourself. Oh, I've got it. And like, if all you're doing is applying tools that you don't totally understand to this kind of small data, I just think it's almost inevitable that you will be overly confident in what you found, and that the future won't look like the past in such a way that your model doesn't really hold. So I still think it's learning math and stats and computer science fundamentals. I just don't think you can really go wrong.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, there is a time commitment to doing that, but I'm glad you think that it's still worth it. John, real quick, we'll mention this again at the end of the pod, but you do have some open positions with the Dodgers, where I know you posted it on your Twitter feed. Where can people learn more about that?
Yeah, if you Google LA Dodgers quantitative analyst, you'll find it. We have a bunch of roles. We're hiring at all levels. Basically, this is the quant team with the Dodgers. We're responsible for building predictive models to try to understand things that we can't directly observe. So things like, how, all the way from like personnel decision type of stuff, like how valuable will this player be in 5 years? And like, what is our sort of uncertainty around that value estimate, all the way down to more tactical things like how good is this pitcher in a matchup against this batter with this type of context around them, like playing at Dodger Stadium or playing at Coors Field. And so like, who should we plan to bring in the 7th inning if we're up 1 run and this batter is up? The group is really pretty much singularly focused on building models, which I think is differentiated from a lot of quote unquote like data science roles where you actually spend a lot of time doing data engineering or data analysis. This is really hardcore focused on build the best models that we possibly can to understand the future. So yeah, if you're interested in that kind of stuff, by all means, hit me up on LinkedIn and apply to the roles.
Awesome. I thought baseball was solved.
Yeah, it turned out I was completely wrong about that. That was a very naive understanding of it. It just, yeah, yeah. It is really funny to reflect on that, though. This is like 2011, 2012. It just seemed like everything I was reading from the outside was that, oh, like we've got all these crazy new metrics. Seems like, the teams have really kind of figured it out already. It's been 8 or 9, almost 10 years since Moneyball.
Right. All right. So you graduate from Stanford, and then your next move is to the Sixers?
Yes, yes. I've been working part-time starting midway through my first year at Stanford with the Sixers. Sachin Gupta, who became the VP over with the Sixers, was actually at Stanford when I was there doing an MBA. So Sam Hinkie introduced us. He'd worked with Sachin in Houston, and he'd met me through the interview process, and so we started working together while I was there. And then he graduated a year ahead of me and joined the Sixers as VP. And yeah, so I just kind of basically was doing stuff part-time there, and then full-time once I finished up. I was very focused on, for the first most of the time beforehand, on draft modeling specifically.
So you're trying to project NBA players from college data, combine stuff,
international. Yeah, exactly.
International.
Yeah, precisely.
And then what kind of tools, and like, did your background that you got from Stanford help there?
Absolutely. I mean, that was the best part, was like I was doing that while I was still there. And so like, I'm
right.
taking the Trevor Hasty's machine learning class, statistical learning class, and basically like every single
right.
day thinking about like, okay, how does this then map to the problem that I'm solving? And, it was super, super useful to be able to kind of do that, because I learned the concepts so much differently than I would have if I was just trying to learn them in a vacuum. Yeah,
for sure. So Trevor Hasty. So was he actually teaching that class?
That was like Stats 315A, I think.
Okay,
yeah.
That's awesome.
Jerome Friedman 315B.
There's still a free PDF of their textbook online, right?
Absolutely, the Elements of Statistical Learning. I used that free PDF for that class, and I've actually been given. Somebody gifted me the hardcover textbook a couple of years ago, so now I have it. But yeah, for that whole time I was using. I mean, this is, for folks listening, this is something that like so many self-taught data science folks have downloaded this PDF, just gone through it, and it is like it's like one of the Bibles in the field. It just teaches you everything from the ground up, with a heavy emphasis on the statistical side of things.
Absolutely. I still refer to it every once in a while. And do you know anything about the decision to just put that PDF out there?
I don't. No, there's a decent number of those where like the preprint version is up or something like that. But no, I don't. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's been it is just remarkable, like how much of a boon that has been. But no, I don't know the genesis of that.
I mean, it's usually one of those things where the publisher is like, "Oh, please don't do that." But I mean, clearly they haven't. And I mean, maybe it's spurring more sales. I mean, I'm sure the hardcover of that book is $300 these days. If you extrapolate the prices of textbooks.
Yeah.
So, awesome. So you're at the Sixers. Give us a general sense for like what it was like there working with Sam. And like it wasn't too long ago. So how it projects to, you guys built a lot of the roster that's still there, or at least elements of it, right?
Well, basically. Yeah. I mean, I'll give you some of what I was working on. So like something that still really keeps me up at night is the 2015 draft. So I built our model for that while I was still at Stanford, but I was working really closely with Ben Falk, who at that time was our VP of strategy. And, we were just going back and forth basically every day and just working hard to get as much data as we possibly could to power our model. Like we understood that, in general, in predictive modeling, most of the gains tend to be from adding better and more data. Like you spend a lot of time trying to fit the best model, but the truth is like most of the time it's just better data. So we've been working really hard on that. It's a pretty laborious process. We had interns spending hours and hours manually labeling and inputting data. And we did a lot of time iterating through ideas for things like how to capture context in the model. Like if you look at some of those like UNLV teams from back in the day, their statistics are monster, but they were just playing this crazy pace. And so if you're looking at like Bo Kimball data, he looks like the best player ever, but you have to normalize it for the environment that he was playing in. So we did a lot of work there.
And I presume that's more than just like normalizing for pace though, right? Like you have to kind of make adjustments for the era, and like I'm sure the efficiency was probably okay. Got it.
Exactly, and there's second order effects from pace. Yeah, exactly. So we really painstakingly tiered historical players based on value, which really in and of itself is a pretty subjective decision, and you kind of need to carefully consider that. But we needed a label for players, and so we worked really hard to kind of determine something that we felt was like really well grounded and accurate. And we did everything quote unquote right modeling wise. We fit a few variants of the model to try to come at the problem from different angles, things like with and without scouting data or like rankings data, that kind of stuff. And so we, just really kind of laid it all out there. And in the end, what I told our GM, Sam, is that kind of the scouting consensus was that there was a big three in that draft of Karl Anthony Towns, D'Angelo Russell, and Jahlil Okafor. And our models all pointed to the same thing. And so, it's like whichever one of those is available, we were picking third, we should take. That was our recommendation. And he used that line at the press conference. He said, I won't be able to quote him exactly, but like there's been a big three all year, and we agree with that. And so we took the guy who was available, which was Jahlil Okafor. And the truth is that decision probably got him fired. At this point, many listeners might not even remember Jahlil Okafor. He flamed out of the league in a few years, and Sam got pushed out 9 months or so after the draft. And so it keeps me up at night because like, where did things go wrong? And part of that is that Ja had some maturity issues. He had a series of kind of bizarre incidents right from the start of the season, got in some fights, got caught speeding over the bridge in Philly. But I think what was more damaging, he got injured. He got a pretty bad injury 2/3 or so of the way through his rookie year. But what I think was really more damaging was what is so hard for me on this is that like we spent so much time getting the model right, but we missed this one huge thing, which was that the league was changing. The context in which, that historical data occurred with multiple bigs on the court and a slower pace was just getting wiped out in real time by the Warriors. Right. So this is like the 2014-15 season, their first championship. And our model had learned well from the past, but it ignored a future where Draymond Green could be, a 6'6" center and teams would be playing 5 out. I think if Jahlil had been drafted, let's say 10 years earlier and he'd stayed healthy and out of trouble, I think he could have been an all-star, like ridiculous low post moves for someone who was that age, silky smooth touch, incredible hands. He actually had pretty good verticality in the post. He had everything he needed. And this is one of the hardest parts of the job, like both as a quant and as an executive is really kind of calibrating how much to trust your ability to pattern match to what you've seen while you're extrapolating where the macro trends in the game are going to go. Yeah. So that's kind of like what I was up to and what was so hard about it.
John, I think that was the best 5 minutes of this podcast in recent memory. That's an incredible story, and I love every aspect of it. I'm actually looking at this 2015 draft, and Karl Anthony Towns went first, and he's maybe indicative of how the league has changed because he's a 3-point shooting machine now.
Yeah.
D'Angelo Russell was second, but like Porzingis was fourth, and then Mario
Hezonja.
Yeah,
Mario Hezonja.
Will Cauley-Stein, Emmanuel Mudiay, Stanley Johnson, Frank Kaminsky.
There's a lot of busts.
This is not. I mean,
look at Devin Booker down below.
Devin Booker at number 13, but like Devin Booker's game has changed so much, right?
So he was a 3-point to become the elite player he has become. Yeah.
Well, he was a sniper in college, right? He was a 3-point shooter, really good shooting, right? And his game is completely different, right? He's like a drive and pull up more so than he is a shooter.
Yep.
Like
they gave him no rope at Kentucky. I mean, like that was a stacked Kentucky team, and he basically didn't handle the ball.
Right. So I don't know. I mean, obviously hindsight's 20/20, right? But like, there's not really a way
for you? I mean, there's no argument for like, oh, we should have taken Devin Booker at 3, right? Based on what we knew at the time. And it's like almost impossible from a player development sense. I mean, that my personal opinion is like, it's almost impossible from a player development sense to see Devin Booker to where he is today.
That's right. And that's what's so hard about it and so maddening is that like all those things are true. And I think the decision to take Jaleel got Sam fired, you know?
Right.
And so it's just such a hard role. And, you know, like, I think, you know, if you could play things 2020, you probably trade the pick. If we could have developed conviction that none of those guys, and like, you know, Porzingis actually did become very good very quickly, although his career has plateaued quickly, or not quickly, but like with injuries and stuff over time. If we could do it all over again, probably trade the pick. But
but was like, I mean, obviously trading down is a huge NFL concept, but like, I mean, I presume it's a good idea. Well, no, and whatever. I mean, Sam Hinkie had this concept.
I don't think it's generally a good idea in basketball, no.
Oh, it's not? Okay, just because there's so much more value.
There's so much more value in getting the top guy. I think it's and my understanding is in football, it's generally been a pretty good deal to trade down because people are overly confident in their ability to say who's like really good. But in basketball, I mean, it tends to be that like the fall off is pretty steep at the very first 3 or 4 picks in the draft. And like, if you're going to get a superstar, it helps a lot to be picking as early as you possibly can. And like superstars drive most of winning in basketball.
Yep, for sure. So what was your transition after, like, how long were you with the Sixers?
Yeah, so I left. Sam, I think, resigned under some duress in that spring. I resigned about 2 months later. Unfortunately, the exit was a little acrimonious with ownership there. I had signed a non-compete agreement, multi-year contract with the Sixers, and they declined to waive that. And so I couldn't go to another team. So I ended up going to Uber, which at that time seemed like it was a really exciting place to be for a data scientist. And it was like, you know, they were doing this crazy complex, hard operations research problem, which is like pricing, scheduling, routing for physical cars in the real world. And I was really, really excited by that kind of stuff. And it was a great place to be a data scientist because they were so committed to the use of models and data in decision making. So I ended up landing there.
Okay. And then when did you end up coming back to the NBA and the Minnesota Timberwolves?
Yeah, so it's actually a funny story. So I was barred from the NBA that year. I actually caught on with a Chinese league team in the CBA. Yeah, so I was working with this amazing executive over there, Lucas Pang, with Guangzhou. And so I did some work with them. You know, the international basketball problem is quite interesting because, you know, there are limits on foreign players in the league, but you can recruit from like basically any professional league in the world outside of the NBA. And, you know, in China, the salaries are pretty high. So you can conceivably get pretty much anyone who's not in the NBA if you're willing to pay. And so we were trying to comb all these professional leagues everywhere for like who would be the best fit for the team. So did that for a year, and then I
did you live over there?
No, I was working part-time. This is while I was at Uber.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. And then after I guess about a year and a half after I left the Sixers, I reached out again to a different person in legal, asked if they would waive my non-compete. They said yes. And so I caught on part-time again with the Houston Rockets, worked closely with Monty McNair, who was, I don't know what his role was there, but basically he was on the analytics side, traveling with the team, helping with in-game tactical strategy. And so did that for a year. And then Sachin, my old boss in Philly, got an AGM role, an assistant GM role with Detroit. So I worked with him part-time for another year there. He went to Minnesota, so I flipped over with him again part-time. And then he was appointed to lead the Timberwolves in October of 2021. And as soon as he got that, he said, "Hey, John, like, I want you to come do this with me." And so, you know, that's the kind of once in a lifetime opportunity to go work really closely with one of your close friends who is running an NBA team. And so I sort of dropped everything and went and did that. Yeah, so that's kind of how I went back full time into the league. I guess in the intervening time, I worked for Uber for about 3 years, running a data science team, and then as a research scientist, and then for about 3 years, leading the data efforts at a truck tech startup called Motive. So yeah, but fall 2021 went back full time as VP of basketball analytics with the Wolves.
And then when you were back in the NBA, like how were the projects the same, maybe different from what you did at Philly?
Yeah, the decisions were the same in the end. It's like drafting, trades, player contracts, free agents, and then in-game stuff. It was more important in Minnesota than in Philly because we had a competitive team. We won 46 games and made the playoffs, and so thinking hard about like especially things like matchup problems. Like, okay, in the play-in game we had to face the Clippers. How should we defend Paul George? Who's the best matchups for him? That kind of stuff. And so the decisions are the same. I'd say the major change in the time between them is that when I was in Philly, the tracking data had just come out. So we had like a year and a half of historical data of 25 frames per second, XY locations for every player on the court, XYZ location for the ball. We didn't really honestly do too much with that at that point just because it was so early and there just wasn't a lot of training data. But by the time I was in Minnesota, you had several seasons, I can't do the math in my head, but 7 or 8 years of data. And so we were able to do a lot more with that there.
Yeah, for sure. So was the tracking data, I guess I'm just interested, and obviously if you can't talk about this, I completely understand, but you mentioned this matchup problem, and it's obviously an answer that every NBA fan has from watching the games, right? But like, how do you even start to make a data-driven decision about that? I mean, I guess it has to start with the tracking data, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of walk you through at a high level. Like the simplest things to do is, probably the most naive thing to do is just look at. So I guess I should say, let me back up. Some of the things in the tracking data are sort of what I would think of as almost like metadata. So for any given possession, when did it start? When did it end? It's simple, but you need to know that. And then for every possession, who guarded who and when, and being able to kind of back that out is done for us by a vendor, basically, who we get these data labels from. And so we actually get labels on who's guarding who every moment in the game. So then you can start to do basic analytics of, okay, when, let's say, Anthony Edwards or Jaden McDaniels or Taurean Prince is guarding Paul George this year, what was the team's overall efficiency and what was PG's efficiency and what were his numbers? And then you can, but that's pretty unsatisfying because the data are so small. So then you go a level deeper. You say, okay, let's not just look at this year. Let's look at the last 3 years or something like that. And so, you get a little more data. The numbers converge a little more, but then it's still small. So then you start to make other assumptions. Like, okay, who are players similar to Paul George in terms of their game, and how did our guys do defending them? And then you can start to think about okay, who are players similar to our guys, and how did they do defending Paul George? And how did they do defending the PG comps? And so, yeah, you can continue on this road 5 to 10 degrees further along. But in the end, it's all just trying to eliminate as much variance as you can, get your parameter estimates as tight as you can, while introducing as little sort of statistical bias into your analysis as possible.
Right. I mean, and you could probably go so far as to, look at each player, put them together into a network and say oh, well, so-and-so is a better defender because he happens to be guarding these guys that are really good offensive players, and do some least squares analysis and solve for how good every player is, right? Because you have the basic data of who's guarding who.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there's
what you're describing is basically a sort of what they call an adjusted plus minus type model.
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. But you can go, well, I mean, I remember Aaron Barzagli doing adjusted plus minus based on, just who was on the court.
Yep. Yep.
But this is much more
exactly. Extend it to who's guarding who. Yep.
Yeah. So please tell me that that's a lot less noisy than what Aaron was doing, a decade ago.
I hate to say it's fundamentally it's still small data though.
That's a bummer.
It's in the end you sort of have to introduce your sort of more restrictive modeling assumptions. So like, people do that through Bayesian hierarchical modeling, right? They do that with priors. There's lots of ways to do it, but if you're sort of just pure data nihilism, it's going to be very, very hard to get enough signal there.
Yeah, for sure. I had Evan Miyakawa on talking about he's doing similar things for college basketball.
Yeah, it's even harder there.
And I told him, I was like, please tell me that there's less noise with this. He's like, no, there's a lot of noise.
Yep.
Which is
that's the name of the game though, is understand how confident you should be.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, unfortunately the answer is they're like not very confident.
Not very, but not zero either, right? Like,
yeah, okay.
All information has signal.
Fair.
And as long as it's information, it has signal. And properly calibrating that is really, really important.
I played with a bunch of that maybe 5 years ago, NBA plus minus, both raw on off the court, and then like adjusted like we've been talking about. And I think I expanded the data set to like a decade, and it said Tim Duncan was awesome. And I was like, oh, sweet. That's great. I'm done. I'm not looking at this ever again.
Yep.
So
and he was until the moment he retired.
My God, he was so good. Excellent. So underrated, right? I have a 12-year-old kid that likes to say Kobe every time he like shoots a like a crumpled up piece of paper. I'm like, man, you kids like so caught up in the hype, man. be saying Timmy or something.
I mean, if I'm shooting, I want Kobe shooting. I'm not sure I want Tim Duncan and his like.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. Fair. Yeah. But I mean, there's a mythology around Kobe, and I certainly respect his work and his work ethic. But Tim Duncan was the best, man, as far as I'm concerned. Awesome, John. Would love to ask you one last question about data science. Like, what we've talked a little bit about advice in terms of for young people whether they should go to grad school. Like, would you have any other advice, and then maybe any open problems that you see as important that could allow a young person to kind of break into the field?
Yeah, it's a great question. I get asked this a lot. And so I have a sort of playbook. Let me walk you through it. So I think the first piece is actually, I don't want to give you a topic. I think you should pick a topic. And your choice of topic actually has a lot of signal, because you want to pick a topic that has actual leverage on decisions. And you want to write about like why it's an important decision. And by the way, I think I guess the zooming out, I think everyone should do what you're saying, which is like try to tackle some problems on your own first. Don't just like apply and say, hey, I want to tackle problems. Like, prove to yourself that you want to tackle problems. And so like, pick a topic that has leverage on decisions and write about it. And then, once you pick your topic, okay, what do you got to do? You need to frame the decision in terms of something quantitative. So figure out what the right metrics are to judge outcomes. And then go find out how to acquire some data. It's a scientific method over and over. Acquire data, test the phenomenon. And you want to be able to execute high quality technical work. And so don't just like put it into a Jupyter notebook and kind of do a bunch of stuff and then call it done. Do that, but then go back and rewrite it 2 or 3 times in order to improve your coding skills and polish it up before you end up posting this. And so, you've got your data, you've done some tests, do some basic statistical work to really demonstrate or prove that the effect you have is or is not significant in some version of that understanding. So like you're going to want to try to quantify the amount of uncertainty using things like, standard error of the mean, and show like why it is or is not rock solid what you've done. And then write it and then rewrite it and rewrite it again, just over and over before you post it. Get edits from people. The thing that people should keep in mind online is that like most of the time, the people evaluating you are only going to read one article or the first paragraph. And if it's not good, they're going to move on. And so don't post anything that you don't think is excellent. And if you've done good work, take the time to polish it, please.
Right.
I just can't get. This is advice I got from an intern manager once. It was just like write it and rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it. If you're going to do a speech, practice it. Right. Like it almost monotonically improves. People can get concerned about over editing or whatever. Don't worry about it. Just do it. Take some time in between. Give it yourself a few days, then rewrite it. What you push online needs to be awesome, because there's so many people who do fine work that goes online that to stand out, it has to be really good.
Absolutely. John, you also mentioned a really important thing too, that the person that is going to read this might only read the first paragraph. So if you open up that,
they'll stop. If it's really good, they'll keep going and read for an hour.
Right. But that first paragraph can't be like, I applied blah, blah, blah machine learning to, there has to be, there has to be some kind of copywriting skill, right? To understand like what someone else is looking for. And then, make that, like sell it. Like, this is a problem. And exactly. Like, this is an important problem. Like, understand that you have that one paragraph to grab their attention. And then once you grab it and you have some good results, like, it's going to work out fine. John Sears, thank you so much for your time and joining me on the Football Analytics Show. Can you please let everyone know where to find you on the internet? And then also if someone is interested in applying to this Dodgers position.
Yeah, so I am mostly a lurker, but available on Twitter at I am John Sears, JOHNSEARS. The sad truth is you can mostly find me on LinkedIn, John Sears, LA Dodgers. We have 3 quantitative analyst roles at all levels, junior, mid-career, and senior, posted on Teamwork Online. You can find that. Just Google LA Dodgers quant analyst. And hit me up on LinkedIn or Twitter if you have any questions about that. We're really looking for amazing people to come join us.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you for listening to that conversation with John Sears of the Los Angeles Dodgers. I got a chance to know John last fall, and I knew he would be awesome at explaining analytics, and he's had such an interesting story across multiple sports that I thought he'd be a fantastic guest for this podcast. Just a reminder, you can get my free sports betting email newsletter. Sign up at thepowerrank.com. Patrons of the Football Analytics Show get a free solo episode every month. For the last couple months, I've been working on a football preview series where I'm looking to make some predictions for the upcoming 2023 football season. If you want to support the podcast, go to patreon.com/footballanalytics. Patreon is Patreon. Football Analytics is all one word. Once again, my name is Ed Fang. Thank you so much for listening to the end of this podcast. I look forward to talking to you again soon.